My name is James, and I'm 32 years old. I'm just an ordinary guy with an ordinary life. I had a job, friends, relationships, and plans for the future. Life seemed to be going just fine, the way it does for most people. I lived in one of those big American cities, trying not to forget about family and my responsibilities. I wasn't the type to seek out thrills or put myself in danger. Everything I did was aimed at achieving success in life, building a career, and simply surviving each day. Life was going along as usual, as I thought it would for the rest of my days. This was my world, stability, comfort, and the everyday routines. But then one day, an opportunity to visit Thailand came up. I decided to go on vacation with some friends. We booked tickets, a hotel, and set our minds on relaxation. We weren't planning anything extravagant, just a break on the beach, swimming in the sea, and maybe a couple of sightseeing tours. It seemed like the perfect getaway, one that promised to be carefree and lighthearted. But little did I know, this trip would be the catalyst that would change everything in my life. It was a typical morning, nothing unusual, and certainly no sign of what was coming. I woke up, looked out the window, and saw the ocean. Everything was calm. I started getting ready, and though I felt a little uneasy for some reason, I shrugged it off. After all, it was just a vacation, right? We headed to the beach, basked in the hot morning sun, and everything seemed normal. We swam, laughed, and enjoyed the natural beauty of Thailand until, out of nowhere, something unthinkable happened. Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to tremble. At first, it was barely noticeable, but within a second, the vibration became so intense that it felt like the earth itself was about to swallow everything in its path. We were standing on the beach, and the sensation was so overwhelming that I thought I might lose my balance and fall into an abyss. What had been a serene beach turned into the epicenter of pure terror. I couldn't react fast enough. Everything around me started to fall apart. The sand beneath my feet began to crack, and then, in an instant, I felt the earth give way under me. I tried to stand, but my legs were unresponsive, as though they had fused with the ground. For a moment, I was paralyzed. I couldn't do anything but watch as buildings in the distance cracked and collapsed. The whole world around me seemed to transform into chaos. Fear hit me first. Deep, paralyzing fear that swept through my entire being. People around me began to scream, run in panic. I watched their bodies shake with each new tremor. Everything was happening too fast, too unexpectedly. I tried to move toward shelter, but my body didn't respond in time. It was as though time itself slowed down, and I could only witness the destruction. I saw a building collapse nearby, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground, my head hitting a rock. I lost consciousness. When I came to, everything around me was different. The world seemed blurry, the colors muted. I lay there, unable to move, feeling a coldness creep over me. The emptiness around me kept growing, and I felt like I was sinking into it. I didn't want to die. Not now, not here. I had just started living, and there was so much more I had to do. This feeling of helplessness was consuming me entirely. All around me, people were scrambling, trying to find shelter, helping each other. Some were shouting names, others were in a complete panic, some just trying to survive. And then, at the moment when I thought it was all over, I felt something. And that's when I saw him. He was standing in front of me. It was Jesus. But I can't say he was just a man or a spiritual figure. He was everything at once. His face wasn't distinct, but his eyes, they shone. And in those eyes, I saw something I could never describe. The moment our eyes met, I felt something deep inside me shift. For the first time, I was not afraid. The panic, the terror, they melted away. I wasn't in pain. I wasn't scared anymore. I was in the presence of someone who wasn't just watching, but truly understood me. At that moment, as I faced Jesus, everything around me faded. There was only him and me. His words were clear. You fear death, but in truth, you fear not death itself. You fear that you have not yet truly lived. Those words hit me like lightning. I realized that I had been living my life in constant pursuit of things, success, status, external signs of achievement, all in an attempt to create some sense of safety. But I had never lived. I had simply existed. I don't know how long I lay there, unable to move, my body paralyzed with terror. The ground was still shaking, but now it felt like the tremors had faded into the background, becoming distant echoes. What dominated my world was the growing silence around me, the deafening stillness that followed the chaos. The last remnants of the earthquake's rage were slowly receding, but it felt like my body had shut down completely, leaving only my thoughts behind. There was a dull throb in my head where I had hit the stone, but the pain didn't seem important anymore. I was fading in and out of consciousness, feeling as though I was trapped in a strange void between life and death. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my chest, louder than the world around me, but everything felt unreal. It was as if I were watching myself from afar, from above, as if the real me had already disconnected from the body lying there on the ground. I could see the people around me, the ones who were still alive, trying to find their way through the dust and chaos. They looked like ants scrambling in the aftermath of some monstrous force, but I felt as though I were beyond their reach. The urgency, the panic, it didn't seem to touch me anymore. I was no longer part of the frantic scramble for survival. I could barely hear the shouts of people in distress, the cries for help, the desperate calls for loved ones. The noise was muffled, as though it was coming from underwater or through a thick wall. And then, in that silence, there was something else, something faint but undeniably real, a presence. At first I thought it was a trick of my mind, my senses fading in and out, but the feeling of it was undeniable. It was like an overwhelming sense of calm, a strange lightness that pushed through the darkness that had surrounded me. I was aware of it before I saw it, a presence so powerful and filled with understanding that it pushed aside the fear and the pain. It felt like hope. I didn't want to open my eyes. I was afraid of seeing the destruction, afraid of facing reality. But it was as though something was drawing me to look. When I finally opened my eyes, everything around me seemed to fade away, and all that remained was a figure. He stood there, in the midst of the ruins, completely unaffected by the destruction. His presence filled the space around him, so radiant that it felt as though the very air shimmered with it. The world seemed to pause, as if time itself had frozen, just so I could witness this moment. I couldn't explain it, but there he was, looking at me with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the entire universe. His eyes, those eyes, were the first thing that I truly noticed. They weren't ordinary eyes. They were full of infinite compassion, understanding, and an unexplainable wisdom. In those eyes I saw the suffering of the world, but also the love and strength to overcome it. The peace in them was so overwhelming that I couldn't help but feel like I was looking into something eternal, something beyond my comprehension. His gaze didn't judge me, didn't reprimand me. Instead, it wrapped around me, pulling me out of the numbness I had been trapped in. In that moment, I felt seen, not just physically, but on a deeper level. I felt understood in a way that I had never felt before. The figure, though surrounded by the devastation, did not seem to be disturbed by it. He was not even in a hurry. The calmness he exuded was so foreign to me that it confused my senses. I had expected him to speak to me in a booming voice, something commanding or grand. But his voice, when it came, was gentle. It wasn't a voice that demanded attention. It simply was, like a whisper in the stillness of the universe. "You fear death," he said, his tone soft but unyielding. "But what you truly fear is not death itself, but the life you've lived without truly living." I blinked, trying to make sense of his words. I felt a tightness in my chest, a lump forming in my throat. It was as though he had reached inside me, touched the very core of my being. I didn't know how to respond. I had lived my life in a constant rush, focusing on the superficial, the outward achievements. Career, money, status, all the things that were supposed to give me value in the eyes of others. But now, in this moment, all of that seemed utterly meaningless. What had I really lived for? Had I ever truly lived, or had I simply been existing, like a ghost passing through the motions, always looking ahead, but never truly being present? He stepped closer, and though I should have been afraid of his power, afraid of his presence, it was the exact opposite. A profound sense of peace washed over me. I wanted to reach out, but I wasn't sure if I could move. His words were like gentle waves, eroding the walls I had built around my heart. "Your fear of death is not the real problem," he continued. "The real problem is that you've allowed the world to consume you, to pull you away from the truth of what matters." His gaze never left me, and I could feel the weight of his words sinking in, stirring something deep within me. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My throat felt dry, and my voice was lost somewhere deep inside. The words he spoke were not meant to comfort me in the traditional sense. They weren't meant to make me feel better about the destruction around us. Instead, they were meant to awaken something in me. They were a challenge, a call to face the truth of my existence. For the first time, I understood that what I had been living wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to simply exist and go through the motions. I had been blind to what truly mattered, to the things that could bring me real fulfillment. As he spoke, the world around me seemed to change. The dust in the air settled, the loud noises faded, and the overwhelming sense of dread began to lift. What was left in its place was clarity. He was not here to tell me what was coming next, nor to explain the events of the world. Instead, his purpose was simple: to awaken me, to help me realize that I could choose a different path. You have the power to change, to find peace, and to live a life filled with meaning, he said, but only if you are willing to let go of the things that weigh you down and hold you back. With that, the figure began to fade, slowly, like the last rays of sunset slipping beneath the horizon. But even as he disappeared, his presence remained, lingering in my heart. It was a strange feeling, like I had just encountered something infinitely precious, something I would never forget. And as the world began to return to normal around me, I knew I was no longer the same. The path ahead of me would not be easy, but it would be different. I had been shown the way, and now it was up to me to walk it. The words spoken by the figure continued to echo in my mind long after he had finished. It felt as though they had taken root inside me, deep within my soul. The weight of his message wasn't something I could ignore. It wasn't a fleeting thought or passing emotion. It was a truth, stark and undeniable, that began to unravel all the false narratives I had built my life on. As I lay there, in the aftermath of the destruction, I realized something profound. I had been living in a lie that I hadn't even known I was part of. The world I had grown accustomed to, the values I had held onto so tightly, had never truly brought me peace. They had only distracted me from what truly mattered. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear. I had been chasing things that were never meant to define me: career success, material wealth, social status. These were the things I had placed my trust in, believing that they would provide meaning and fulfillment. But as the figure's words resonated in me, I began to see how these things had only distanced me from what I truly needed: connection, love, and understanding. I had built walls around my heart, convinced that these external measures of success would make me whole. But now, in the face of everything that had happened, I understood how hollow those pursuits were. They were distractions, chains that kept me from seeing the truth. As I lay there, feeling the presence of the figure still lingering in the air, I realized that this moment was not just about me. It wasn't just a personal revelation, but something that could apply to everyone, everywhere. The world around us was changing, and not in a way that we could control or ignore. The figure had spoken of a coming destruction, a shift that we were all too blind to see. It wasn't just an earthquake or a natural disaster. It was a deeper, more insidious force that had been quietly consuming us for years. The addiction to technology, the obsession with social validation, the increasing isolation from each other, these were the true forces that had been eroding our society piece by piece. The figure spoke again, his voice soft but firm, cutting through the confusion in my mind. "The world is at a crossroads," he said. "The choices you make now will determine the future of your world. You must choose love over fear, unity over division, truth over illusion." His words were simple, but the weight of them was staggering. I felt as though the entire fate of humanity rested on these few sentences. The question wasn't just whether I, as an individual, would change. The question was whether we, as a collective, would rise above the darkness that threatened to consume us all. Would we choose love over hate? Would we choose to heal instead of harm? Would we choose the path that would lead us toward peace, or the one that would bring us closer to destruction? As he spoke, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility settle over me. This wasn't just a passive message, it was a call to action. It wasn't enough to simply hear the truth. I had to do something about it, and not just for myself, but for the world around me. The figure's presence was a catalyst, awakening something inside of me that had been dormant for far too long. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and I could see the world with a clarity I had never experienced before. I could see the pain, the isolation, the fear, but I could also see the potential for change. The light of truth had shone through, and I realized I had the power to choose differently. You have the power to change, the figure continued, but you must be willing to face the truth about yourselves. You must confront your fears, your insecurities, your attachments to things that do not serve you. Only then can you begin to heal. His words cut deep, and I could feel the weight of them sinking into my soul. I had to face the truth of my own life, the truth of how I had been living in a world of illusions, detached from the very things that could bring me peace. The figure's message wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. We all had to confront our personal truths and let go of the things that were keeping us stuck in cycles of destruction. There was a long silence as I processed his words, and during that time, I felt an immense peace settle over me. It wasn't a peace that came from external circumstances, but from within. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I understood what true peace meant. It wasn't about avoiding pain or discomfort. It was about accepting the present moment, no matter how difficult or challenging it might be. It was about being grounded in love and connection rather than fear and separation. And in that peace, I realized that the path ahead of me would not be easy, but it would be meaningful. I was being called to live with intention, to act with purpose, and to choose love every single day. The figure looked at me one last time, his gaze filled with compassion and understanding. "You are not alone," he said softly. "You are part of something much larger than yourself, and the choices you make now will ripple out and affect the world in ways you cannot yet comprehend." His words were not meant to offer comfort, but to challenge me to see the bigger picture. I was a small part of something vast, something interconnected, and the impact of my choices would stretch far beyond my own life. This was the responsibility that came with knowing the truth. It wasn't just about me, it was about all of us, together. As the figure began to fade, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. I knew that this moment, this encounter, was a turning point, not just in my life, but in the life of humanity. The figure had given me a gift, a glimpse into a future that was both frightening and full of possibility. It was up to us, all of us, to choose the path that would lead us toward healing and peace. I could no longer ignore the truth that had been laid bare before me. I had to act, and I had to act now. When the figure was gone, I was left with a sense of profound clarity. The world around me still seemed chaotic, but I no longer felt lost in it. I understood for the first time that I had the power to change not just my own life, but the lives of those around me. The message was simple: choose love, choose truth, and choose connection. These were the things that would guide me in the days ahead. And as I rose to my feet, I knew that this was just the beginning. The real work was only just starting. From that moment on, my life was different. I began to see the world through new eyes. I reached out to others, no longer driven by the need for validation or success, but by a deep desire to make a meaningful difference. I stopped wasting time on things that didn't matter and focused instead on building real, authentic relationships. The truth of what I had learned didn't come easily, but it had set me on a path that felt more real, more alive than anything I had experienced before. I no longer feared what the future might hold because I knew that the future was shaped by the choices I made today. And with that knowledge, I moved forward with hope, with love, and with the unwavering belief that together, we could heal the world. As I slowly began to regain my awareness, something shifted within me. The moment with the figure, the wisdom he shared, the peace he imparted, remained etched into my heart. I had hoped the feeling of calm would stay with me forever, that I could somehow carry it into the world outside. But as the seconds passed, I realized something that both terrified and exhilarated me. I was not meant to live in that peace forever. I wasn't meant to retreat from the world. Instead, I was being asked to bring that peace into the chaos, to live with it even in the midst of destruction. The world outside hadn't changed. It was still reeling from the earthquake, from the chaos. But I had changed. And with that change came an undeniable responsibility. The weight of that responsibility settled over me like a heavy cloak. I wasn't just a passive observer anymore. I wasn't just someone who had received a moment of enlightenment and would carry on as though nothing had happened. I was someone who had seen the truth, who had experienced something profound, and now I couldn't go back to the way things were. The world had shown me its fragility, its imperfections. I had seen the fear, the pain, and the selfishness that had overtaken so many lives. But more than that, I had seen the possibility for change. I had seen the power of love and compassion to heal wounds that had festered for years, and I knew that I was called to be part of that change. It was then that the true weight of the figure's message became clear. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my personal transformation. It was about a collective awakening. The world was crying out for help, for understanding, for love. It wasn't enough to just change myself and expect everything else to fall into place. I had to take action, and not just any action. This was about the kind of action that came from a place of deep, internal conviction. I had to be the change I wanted to see in the world, and I had to encourage others to do the same. The path would not be easy, but it was necessary. I knew the world would not change overnight, but I believed that every small act of kindness, every genuine connection would make a difference. As I stood up, my body aching from the ordeal, I looked around me and saw the devastation. People were still struggling, some were trapped under rubble, others were helping where they could, but there was a sense of hopelessness in the air. I could feel it, like a weight pressing down in the hearts of everyone around me. And yet, despite the despair, I also saw something else. I saw the potential for hope. I saw people reaching out to each other, offering help, showing compassion. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was a spark, a glimmer of something greater that could rise from the ashes of this catastrophe. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't have to be a hero. I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to show up, to offer what I had, and trust that it would be enough. The road ahead seemed impossible. How could one person make a difference in a world so broken? How could my small, seemingly insignificant actions have any real impact? These questions haunted me as I walked through the ruins, looking at the faces of people who had lost everything. But then I remembered the figure's words. "You are part of something much larger than yourself." Those words echoed in my mind, reminding me that I wasn't alone. I had the power to change, yes, but I wasn't the only one. There were others out there, others who had also felt the awakening, others who were also ready to act, and together, we could be the change. One small act of kindness at a time, we could shift the momentum. I realized that the true power of change didn't lie in grand gestures or sweeping reforms. It lay in the small, everyday choices we made. It was in how we treated the person next to us, how we chose to show up for others in their time of need, how we allowed love and compassion to guide our actions instead of fear and selfishness. As I walked through the wreckage, I began to help where I could. I pulled people from beneath fallen structures. I offered comfort to those who were scared. I simply listened to those who needed someone to hear their pain. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something more powerful. I had presence. I had the ability to be fully present in the moment, to offer what I could, and to trust that in doing so, I was making a difference. The more I helped, the more I realized that the act of giving was not just about helping others. It was about helping myself. Each time I gave of myself, whether through physical help or emotional support, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I was no longer chasing something external. I was no longer driven by the need to be recognized or validated by the world. I had found something more profound. I had found purpose. And as I moved through the shattered city, offering whatever I could, I began to see the world differently. The chaos, the pain, the destruction, it was all part of a greater process. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. As I continued helping others, I noticed a change in the people around me. Slowly, people began to shift from fear to hope, from despair to action. The more we reached out to one another, the more we began to heal. It wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't an instant transformation, but it was real. It was happening. People were coming together, supporting each other, showing kindness. And in that unity, I saw something extraordinary. I saw the beginning of something beautiful. The earthquake, the disaster. It had revealed the cracks in our society, but it had also revealed the potential for healing, and together we were beginning to repair those cracks. Days turned into weeks, and the healing process continued. We rebuilt homes, we rebuilt lives, but more importantly, we rebuilt relationships. We learned to lean on each other, to trust each other, and to put our differences aside for the sake of something greater. And as we rebuilt, I realized that I had become part of something much larger than myself. I was no longer just a man trying to survive. I was part of a collective force that was changing the world. And the more we worked together, the more I realized that this transformation wasn't just about rebuilding the physical world. It was about rebuilding the hearts of the people. We were learning to live with love, with compassion, with understanding. And in that, we were creating a new world. The journey ahead was still long, and I knew there would be challenges. There would be moments of doubt, of frustration, of setbacks. But I no longer feared them. I had been given the tools to face them, to approach them with love and determination. I had seen the power of small acts, of kindness, of human connection. And I knew that as long as we held on to that, no matter how much the world tried to pull us apart, we would continue to grow, to heal, to evolve. The earthquake had been a wake-up call, yes, but it had also been a blessing. It had reminded me that true strength lies not in surviving alone, but in living together. And in that truth, I had found my purpose. And so, as I continued to walk the path of transformation, I carried the lessons I had learned with me. I no longer felt the need to chase external success, to prove myself to the world. Instead, I focused on being present, on loving deeply, and on living in a way that honored the people around me. The figure's message had taken root in me, and it had blossomed into something beautiful. I no longer lived for myself alone. I lived for the world, and in that, I found peace. I found meaning. I found my place in the grand, ever-unfolding story of life. And as I moved forward, I knew that I wasn't just part of the change. I was the change.